Now for analysis on the coup in Burkina Faso, I'm joined live from here in Washington by Daniel Eizenga, a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Daniel, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, this is the second coup in just 9 months in Burkina Faso. What does this say about the stability, the political stability of Burkina Faso?
Yes, I think it says quite a lot. In fact, I think it speaks to the inherent instability of military governments. Once you have a coup that's taken hold, the justification and rationalization for other extralegal actions has already been made. So it shouldn't be surprising that we see others attempt to seize power. The impacts of internal stability and military professionalism really can't be understated when talking about military coups. And I think particularly in this case, we see that there were very many moments where the situation on the ground was very tense. The military was quite divided. You had the potential for conflict to break out between different groups within the military, either in support of the now ousted junta leader Damiba or in support of current junta leader Traore. But this is consistent with what we see across the continent with authoritarian-leaning countries. Conflict, instability are baked into that form of governance.
Daniel, Captain Ibrahim Traore is promising to defeat the jihadists. First of all, who is Captain Traore, and can he really defeat these jihadists?
Well, we're still learning a little bit about Captain Traore, but we know that he is, we believe he's 33 or 34, and so as one of the protesters I think mentioned, he's about the same age as Captain Thomas Sankara when he took power in the 80s, and who has a long legacy in Burkina Faso. We know that Captain Traore studied at the University of Ouagadougou, that he joined the army in 2010, that he was promoted to the rank of captain in 2020. There's some confusion around where he comes from in the military, whether he has an association with the special forces. There's a counter-terrorist unit that's sometimes called the Cobra unit, and some outlets have reported that he's been linked to the Cobra unit, but others are saying that he may have been stationed in Kaya as part of an artillery unit there. And Kaya being, I think, the 5th largest town in Burkina Faso, and right on the front with the militant Islamist insurgents in northern Burkina Faso. Whether he'll be able to do anything different than his predecessor, Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, is a fair question. I think that unfortunately at the moment, the real victory here is for the militant Islamist groups operating in the country. I mean, this serves as a huge distraction of resources, political will, personnel. It really is a destabilizing event, and all of that plays into the hands of the militant insurgents that have been wreaking havoc across large swaths of Burkina Faso now for several years.
Daniel, following the coup, crowds of people were seen waving Russian flags in Ouagadougou, in other parts of Burkina Faso. What do you make of that?
Well, we know that Russia has been the leading purveyor of disinformation campaigns in Africa, with at least 16 known disinformation campaigns on the continent. And these campaigns are targeting public opinion. They're basically influence campaigns. They're trying to sway public opinion, stoke anti-French sentiment, and build support for a so-called Russian model to counterterrorism. But the reality is that even in just neighboring Mali, Russian interventions have gone disastrously. We've seen civilian fatalities in Mali increase by 150% in 2022 since this mercenary group that's linked to the Russian state, Wagner, was deployed to Mali. This is consistent across the board. In Central African Republic, we've seen that large parts of the country have essentially been annexed to the Wagner mercenaries. That the Central African Republic no longer controls that territory and is at sort of the disposition of Wagner mercenaries. In central Mali, the security situation has really deteriorated, and that's had a huge impact on northern Burkina Faso as well, which borders central Mali. And so it's really kind of head-scratching that folks would see the Russians as a better model or a better option for combating violent extremists. I think rather Russia deploying Wagner to Africa is really just an effort by Moscow to try and displace France, and the relentless Russian disinformation messaging is a big part of why we see these kinds of public displays for that model.
We've also seen reactions coming out of the African Union, the ECOWAS, the West African bloc there, and also the United Nations condemning this coup. But are these condemnations enough? Should they be followed by action?
I think they really need to be. The African Union did come out and they put out a condemnation saying that this is a resurgence of unconstitutional ousters, and that's very, very worrying. The UN, as well as you said, has condemned the action. I think that probably the most disappointing statement so far, however, has come out of ECOWAS.
Right.
It's really more of a non-statement on behalf of the current chairperson at ECOWAS, President Malo. He welcomed the peaceful conclusion of events and took note of Damiba's resignation, but he really didn't go far enough. And I think that if anyone should recognize the slippery slope in the region that these repeated coups create, it should be ECOWAS. They need to take a strong position and take a break from allowing this unconstitutional.
Right, Daniel, we're going to have to wrap it there. Thank you so much. Daniel Eizenga is a research fellow at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. For more details on the story, please visit voaafrica.com.